We appreciate the partnership with NASCA over this last year. My name is Olivia Fry. I'm the Director of Membership and Partnerships for NASCO. And for those of you who are not familiar with our organization, we are the National Association of State Procurement Officials, and our members are the CPOs from all 50 states in the district and their staff in the Central Procurement Office. I'm so pleased to be joined this morning by two of our fabulous members, Jamie Shore and Roz Ingram. Jamie Shore is the Chief Procurement Officer for the state of Maine. She's a current NASCO board member and chair of the NASCO Eastern Regional Council. Roz Ingram is the Chief Procurement Officer for the state of Florida and the 2021 NASCO incoming president. Both of our CPOs here today are dealing with immense pressure and challenges with pandemic response and now the hurricanes up the East Coast. Roz has been in the Emergency Operations Center for many weeks now. I know she'll speak more about that in just a few minutes, but many challenges to overcome, but they're doing it so well and looking towards the future. So to take a few moments just to give you all a little bit of background about the response that we've been doing for our members, the Chief Procurement Officers. Since March, we've pivoted. You'll hear that word many times in our session here today. I'm sure you've heard it many times over the last several months to provide resources and opportunities for networking and collaboration across the states with our CPOs. We've hosted weekly directors calls for our CPOs and their staff to talk about what they're doing and just provide different resources that they've needed to help them find PPE across the country. So before I go ahead and hand it over to Roz and Jamie, I want to go ahead and welcome you all to the session entitled Pivoting Procurement Innovation Amidst the Pandemic. And I'd like to ask the NASCA team to go ahead and pull up our first poll question. So we definitely want this to be more of a discussion. Roz and Jamie are fabulous and they'll have great questions, I'm sure, for the audience and for each other. But how many times have you heard or used the word pivot since March? Go ahead and take a look at your screen here on Slido. I know for me, probably too many times to count.
So for those of you who are new to Slido, you can go to slido.com and simply put in the code NASCA20, or you can use the camera on your phone and use the QR code. If you put your camera over that QR code, it will take you to the URL.
Yeah, that's kind of what I figured. So that's been a buzzword the last several months. Everyone has pivoted, all of our associations, all of our state members, all of our supplier community friends. We'll continue to do so, but just wanted to open it up there a little bit. So I want to go ahead and turn it over to Jamie and Roz and just give them an opportunity to talk a little bit about how their teams have pivoted and some of the challenges they've seen over the last couple of months. Roz, you want to go ahead and get started?
Sure. Good morning, everybody. I think for most of you on the phone have different relationships with your CPOs. They may or may not, most of them, I believe, report through you. But another difference that's really important for how our discussion moves forward is how we're organized. So some agencies, some states have a centralized procurement office where they buy everything for everybody all the time. Some are completely decentralized and that CPO just does policy. We're a hybrid in the state of Florida. So we have state term contracts and those are mandated for use. And then we have alternate contract sources such as NASPO that we can use, the agencies may use or not compelled to use. So having said that, so that's moving into this pandemic, that's how we were situated. And if something came up through an agency, they would look to us first. And if there was a lot of interest, we would do a procurement and everybody's used to how that process moves forward. Well, when this occurred, as everyone on the phone knows, that didn't happen. So we already had the competition from foreign countries with PPE that had occurred prior to our organization here. And then in the state of Florida, and I'm not sure how many of the northern states were affected first, but certainly New York and New Jersey happened to hit their numbers coming in prior to us, and then we were later here. So as we were trying to get the things that we felt we needed urgently, there was no way to do that. I went to my state term contracts, and those people that you're all familiar with, Henry Schein and that MCAP for other reasons, and all of these vendors that we use were already tapped out. So what do you do? And not just now, you got people getting sick, and so the urgency is on a level I've never seen before. And in Florida, you know, we see a lot of level 1 activations. We have quite a few hurricanes, you know, over time. We had a little bit of drought for about 8 years, and as you know, the last few years have been pretty active. So we are used to urgency on a level where we have a solution. There was not a solution here. So as with other states, because I've talked to some of my peers, we started doing things that were not as normal to us. So we were reaching out, actually vendors were reaching out to us, some credible, some not credible, but at the time we didn't know which was which. So we were forced into, like other states, forced into trying to do a wire transfer or pay some up front. And I don't know how many of you have heard the story. Mine is not unique. I had $8 million worth of 95s ordered, and I was having somebody drive a check down for half the money to meet the ship in Miami. And before they could get there, the ship got there, sold it to somebody cash on the dock. So now we have that issue on top of everything else. So there was a lot of, and I won't use the pivot word, but this one time, Olivia, a lot of change that had to happen very quickly, and a lot of, as much as we could, put gates into place where we didn't have them because we weren't going down a road we normally went down. So we started trying to vet vendors based on those things that we could vet on. And we've been active since March 7th. We've been at level 1 activation for 158 days. I've been at the EOC since March 9th. And what we have done is we would try to vet where we could. I know there's outside vendors that we're trying to assist with that too. But the other thing we did, we hired inspectors, because we were having people try to sell us stuff that wasn't there. So there was, while you would think people would try to do the right thing because there's people's lives at stake, that didn't always happen. And I guess we're not as used to that in our industry. You know, we always have a certain segment of vendors that are not compliant, but not to the level where it would affect other people's health generally. So a lot of this was things that had to happen that we were uncomfortable with. And any emergency order that's signed by our governor, agencies automatically can suspend Chapter 287, which is our procurement law. So they are able to move forward to purchase in the best way possible whatever they need. So I've been over there the whole time, and we've been trying to do that as competitively as we can. But I would tell you that part right there, competing with everybody on the planet, you know, has been the most difficult. So then even if and NASPO has discussed this at length, trying to establish a contract, then how would that contract work? So would some states get things other states didn't get? I mean, we still have that competition that's inherent to this particular pandemic. So for that first 6 weeks, I would say we were really struggling. For the last couple of months, we've moved into a pretty standard way of doing things. We now have a daily check with each vendor. We don't have them saying it's going to be 8 weeks, 12 weeks anymore. The pipeline, like other people, the supply chain has opened up somewhat. We are trying to push any internals, anybody domestic to the United States, to get as much ramped up as they can, so our dependency is less. I do deal more in my position in Florida, and I know this is not the same everywhere else, but I do have a very close relationship both with my chief here at Department of Management Services and with the governor's office through the Division of Emergency Management. So I think that one of the takeaways I would like to present to you is I think it's critically important for your CPOs to have that relationship with you, and where they can with you via the governor's office or your Division of Emergency Management, whatever you call that, however it exists. Because even if the final decision, and in my case, it wasn't mine, it's the division director for DEM, but he talks to me about it. So we look at those things together, and then he makes a decision. I think it helps not to knee jerk, and that's what kind of a lot of stuff, when you're really worried about people, you know, you tend to make decisions very quickly. Not all of them are sound. So I think a lot of the lessons learned surround those kinds of things. I actually have had this added to my position description for when I retire in 3 years. The person that takes my position will be in their position description, they will be working at the EOC when we're activated. I've been doing it a lot over the last 5 years, and it doesn't help us to have, as you see from my background here in my picture, you know, every couple of weeks we have a threat of another hurricane. And so now we're doing non-congregate sheltering contracts, and we're trying to figure out how people who may or may not be sick are going to evacuate. So all of these things together provide for a very challenging time. The predictions are telling us we'll have a Cat 3 or higher, probably in September. And so we're trying to, you know, get ready for that. And that's sort of making it more difficult. And I know everybody on the East Coast and all the way over to Texas are probably looking at those same things, because we never know exactly where it's going to be. The other piece of this that I think you might have had in one of your other sessions, I'm not sure, is we're completely teleworking in my department. And it's been so successful that most of the division directors have decided to, while we'll have some people in the office, maybe 1 day a week, we'll probably, when this is over, we're moving to a new model. I think people were so fearful. And then when pushed into it, we realize it's not as scary, and you can trust people and they do their work. And we found that to be very successful. I can still get my vendors vetted. I can still get all of my state term contracts done. But those are the things that in Florida that we went through. And I would tell you that first 6 to 8 weeks was really tough. And now we feel, I hate to say comfortable, because honestly, it feels like I'm Groundhog Day 164. It feels the same all the time, but we don't knee jerk anymore. And I think if anything, it's helped us realize that no matter what the challenge is, you can always sit down and have a thoughtful conversation, bring the people to the table, and move forward.
Thanks, that's a really great overview of everything that's going on in Florida. And to Jamie and Roz both, I mean, on top of a pandemic, hurricane response, I just appreciate you all both so much for being here today. I do want to remind everyone, one should be a kind of a conversation. So as questions come up, please feel free to put those in the Q&A box, and I'll send those over to Roz and Jamie. But Jamie, you have a little bit of a different situation, similar to Roz and everything going on. Can you kind of tell us a little bit about Maine and what's going on, challenge-wise and opportunity-wise?
Yeah, I think, you know, I'm going to focus a little bit more on the new normal. And so as Maine pivoted, if you will, there's number one for me, but as we pivoted this pandemic, I want to compare that to pre-pandemic, during pandemic, and then sort of our new normal. So pre-pandemic, right, let's think about toilet paper. It was all cupcakes and rainbows, right? We could go to the grocery store, we could buy 1-ply, 2-ply, we could even buy 3-ply. You could get the mega roll, the small roll, the printed version. Awesome, right? And then the pandemic hit, and overnight, the world was petrified because there's no toilet paper. Now, toilet paper is not a life-threatening good, but what Roz and I are purchasing every single day means that lives are saved. So for us to fail, that's not an option. So procurement had to innovate to make sure that we were saving lives so quickly. When the supply chain started to open up a little bit, mid-pandemic, I'll call it, the price is high. Maybe we could only buy 1-ply toilet paper. And in a house with all boys, 1-ply toilet paper is not an option for me. That's not okay. So I don't want to go pay their prices, and I want to be able to still acquire the good that I want. So let's fast forward a little bit, right? I'm thinking 2 months. I think Roz said 6 to 8 weeks was particularly challenging, and I would echo that point. I sat at my desk in my home, and I thought, wait, I need to go teach 4th grade today. I need to go teach preschool today. I need to work on a business plan for my own business. I need to buy N95s to save the lives of the people of the state of Maine. Oh, wait, I need to go take a nap because I have to go call a vendor in China at 2 a.m. and then be able to get up and work the next day. And I have this list going through my mind, and I just sighed, and I took a breath, and I said, is this the new normal, right? Is this what it's going to be like for procurement officials going forward? When do we stop reacting and start responding in a coherent, effective, efficient manner? will we even know when it's time to do that? So I kind of dusted off my strategic plan in between my naps and conversations with manufacturers in China. And I thought, I need to pivot. There you go. There's number 2 or 3, Olivia. I need to innovate. And I happened to have an opportunity to chat with Dustin Lanier of Civic Initiatives, and we were working through a new normal design exercise. And Dustin previously shared this exercise with the NASCA community. So I want to just touch on 4 points that I was able to really see the light at the end of the tunnel after I worked through the strategic plan and where we were going. So number 1, I looked at my strategic plan and what was happening during the pandemic, and I identified what the barriers were to accomplishing this incredibly important life-saving work. The standard processes that Roz and I used for years before this, they weren't conducive to responding to this pandemic. RFPs were too long. Vendors were not responding. Vendors didn't need our contracts anymore. We needed them. And so that was a little bit of a change. The state of Maine didn't have a robust portfolio of contracts that we could call on to respond to the emergency. And, piggybacking on what Roz said, those vendors just didn't have the items. And if they had items, it was something that we couldn't afford, we couldn't get timely. So there was a whole host of marketplace issues that happened. We weren't set up to perform our work remotely, right? As Roz mentioned, we do administrative hearings in the state of Maine. All of a sudden, we're forced into litigation behind a computer screen. And for counsel out there, that makes cross-examination particularly difficult when you're trying to follow the rules of civil procedure. So once we identified those barriers, we started to move into how do we overcome those barriers? We changed processes, right? We couldn't do the formal RFPs. The state of Maine maintained open, transparent competition. We did mini bids. We changed from an RFP to a request for application. It's a smaller version that can be performed much quicker. One of the most important, number 4, pivot points for the state of Maine is we reached out to our local vendors and we asked them, hey, I know you normally make LL Bean boots, but would you consider in this case to start producing masks for us? Would you help us with making hand sanitizer or gloves? I know you're not certified vendor X right now to make medical grade equipment, but would you consider starting to get that certification to create N95s or other surgical gowns, for example? And so we continue to look at those barriers and how can we overcome that. Number 3, what do we do next, right? We have to make our list. We have to work with our chief administrator and our state and our governor to say, here's where procurement needs to head in the future. So statute changes. We need to work with the legislature. We need to update our manuals. Our manual that we had used for 20 years doesn't work anymore. Our processes need to change. Our standard operating procedures needed to be updated. We needed new key performance indicators to make sure that our team is performing. Working with vendors has to change. So we're rewriting the playbook, right, is essentially what we're doing. And I think, really supporting our staff to continue to do what they do every single day, support taxpayer dollars, build confidence in our constituents, and do it in that innovative way, that's key to us continuing to support our administration. And I think lastly, I would just add, for lessons learned, we're operating in an emergency, but not everything is an emergency. Not everything is a sole source. Not everything needs to cost quadruple of what it was before. Sometimes it's super important just to take a breath, think back to what has worked in the past, and try to creatively apply it to what we're doing in our policies and procedures now. And I just put it out there, not only to the NASCA community, but also I've put it out there to the NASPO community. It's up to us to rewrite the new normal, right? So if this is how we want it to be, great. All my staff are remote. I've already given up the space in my office building. I intend to do not only remote work, but remote education and starting to look at creative technologies. That's part of my new normal.
That's great, Jamie. I think we all could probably use that as a slogan in our telework, wherever we're working space. We're operating an emergency, but that does not mean everything is an emergency. And taking that step back and taking a breath, and it'll all be okay. We're figuring out as we go. Great. We did have a question from Molly Marsh from the AMR team, and she said, let's see if I can find it here. So much action in the chat box. There's a big difference between reaction and response. Do you feel like you've made the transition?
If you're asking me from the state of Maine, yes, I feel like we've made the transition. The state of Maine is not, however, in the same position that Roz is in Florida. We don't have the same numbers. So we were able to pivot from reaction to response fairly quickly.
Yeah, how about you, Roz? Do you feel like your team, being a hotspot, has transitioned from reaction to response at this point?
We have what I would, by the way, hi, Molly. It's nice to hear from you. In Florida, the way we do our hurricane is response and recovery. So we really just used that model and transferred it over. So yes, I would tell you the first 6 weeks was reaction. And now we have moved pretty quickly out of, for a lot of reasons, we were forced to, plus then we were trying to do it in a way that made sense. So yes, I feel comfortable that we have.
So now that Jamie and Roz, you've both talked about different new or innovative procurement practices that you put into place during emergency response mode during the pandemic, I want to talk a little bit about some of that may stay in place as we rewrite our new normal. So the first one I want to talk about today is telework. So we have a couple of poll questions to kind of kick us off. I know you both have touched on this a little bit. If the NASCA team could bring up the first telework poll question. The question is, according to the National Research Data Group, which group is least productive working from home? And the answer may surprise you. Which generational group is least productive working at home or teleworking? Gen Z, millennials, or Gen X? Our youngest workforce is kind of the consensus. Okay, so millennials. I didn't realize I'm on the very end of the millennial group, so I won't take it offensively. Jamie, do you want to speak to this question a little bit? You brought this full question up, and I was really surprised by the answer.
Yeah, I would be happy to. So Generation Z, the 18 to 24-year-olds, are the least productive working at home. The reason for that is they just don't have the years underneath their belt, if you will, for that office experience. So the millennials, the Gen Z typically need a bit more oversight and a sense of accountability to really perform. Gen Z misses social interaction, and they're most concerned with the impact on culture to be able to socially interact going forward as a result of this pandemic. Conversely, Gen X is the most productive at home. They're the most mature in the office setting. They have that independent drive to be able to work remotely. They don't mind staying at their home. I'm not a Gen X, I'm actually identified as a millennial, but I will say I love not having to sit through a drive-through and get a cup of coffee in the morning. I can just walk to my refrigerator and pull out my cold brew, and I'm good to go. I think it's fantastic. So the Gen Xers really are most concerned with the financial impact of the virus, the paycheck, supporting kids. It's really just an interesting dynamic if you think about the two groups, and as you start to frame the remote workforce, it's important to think about who is comprised of your office setting.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Olivia, Jamie, can I come in with a follow-up question? And I want to give you some reassurance, Olivia. We had a typo in the question. So the millennial is actually up to 39, not 20.
Wait a minute. Thank you, I appreciate that.
Jamie,
I still won't take offense to that though.
Jamie, Ross, how are you onboarding new talent? So when you go to this distributed workforce, let's say your governors say we need to ramp up procurement because we're in this emergency situation. There's no introduction to the coffee machine and the conference rooms and the walk around the office. Whatever generation people are, how are you bringing in sort of emergency support that are working remotely?
Yeah, no face-to-face.
And we're just, actually, I'm doing that right now, but before I go into that, I'm a little offended. I saw a comment put on there as well that the boomers are not on the list, because that would be me. So, and we work, actually, I would say we're probably in between because we probably don't move forward as fast with certain things. But yes, I'm a boomer, one of the few on the phone, I'm sure. Okay, so I am bringing somebody in right now. Monday is her first official day with me, and I'm lucky in this case in that I'm stealing her from the Division of Emergency Management.
Wow.
So I'm able to actually have her report over there for probably the first couple of days with me, and then I'll send her home and she will do the training virtually. What that has made us change our policies and the way we deal with people is now they will have a lot more exchange on Teams or whatever process. Teams is usually what we use to be able to have that interaction, because if you don't have that, I don't care what generation you're in, you're going to feel like a robot. So we have already made a determination that for the first full week of service, besides all the documents and everything they have to do independently, that we will have the face-to-face at least 3 to 4 hours a day. And then sort of have that depending on where it can be. Like I can bring her in with me because she can mask up and be with me at the EOC. And then when she comes back over, the 1 day a week or whatever she does here. But yes, we are making changes.
And Scott, I would just add to that. The first thing that we do is get their home office, their home address, and then we send them a roll of 1-ply toilet paper. And we say, if you can survive this, then you can survive in procurement services and state government.
Just one roll.
I'm just kidding. No, well, a little. In all actuality, we spend a good bit of time with any new employee via Teams. It's not tremendously different, though. We really do encourage hands-on learning in the state of Maine. We do have more frequent interaction. So, we won't leave the employee for a day or two at a time, right? There's frequent check-ins morning and the afternoon. Questions, we encourage as many questions as possible. And we did hire somebody right before the pandemic hit. She had been on board for 3 days. She was still learning, where the bathrooms are and the coffee maker is, but she figured out very quickly that by dialing in for 10 minutes every morning with her team to enjoy a morning cup of coffee, if you will, and have that conversation, not only was she able to learn about procurement procedures that she needed every day, she built relationships with her team and trust. Those are the critical components to be able to effectively onboard somebody, is build the trust and build the relationship. The procurement policies and procedures and statute, that stuff's easier to learn than building trust.
Yeah. Great question, Scott. Can we have the NASCA team pull up the next poll question? Just out of curiosity, I think I know where this is going, but are you currently teleworking our attendees here today? And as we get that question going, I will add that here at NASPO, there was a staff member on our team that we hired, and her first day was the day that we started working remotely. So I texted her on a Sunday night and I said, I know your first day is tomorrow. Can you meet me at 7 a.m.? I'll give you your stuff and then get out of here, go home. So I know for me, I was stressed out being a supervisor, worried that is she having a miserable experience. Our culture at our workplace is so important, and it's difficult to do that. So I was pinging some of my colleagues, hey, have you reached out? Will you please reach out? Say hello, make her feel welcome. So I think that is so key, Roz and Jamie, having that face-to-face, even if it's via a virtual platform like Teams or Zoom or whatever you use in your office. Overwhelmingly, yes, teleworking. NASCA, can you all bring up the next poll question? If you are currently teleworking, those of you who said you are, does your office have plans to go back in 2020? I've heard kind of all across the board here. Yeah, kind of what I expected. Great. Okay, a little bit of a mix. Quite a few plan to telework moving forward. I know, Jamie, you mentioned that your office recently gave up office space, teleworking permanently. Can you talk a little bit about how you came to that decision, or was that difficult? Or you think about state government and we are being innovative, but maybe that's not always the first word that comes to mind when people hear state government. So that's, I mean, that's just amazing to me that your state is not alone and teleworking permanently moving forward.
Yeah, so at the peak of the pandemic in the state, we hit about 86% of our workforce was working remotely. As a result of that, we've seen, we've tracked the miles that we've saved, carbon emissions that have been saved. And so we intend somewhere between 40 and 45% of the state workforce will remain remote. My staff, as far as I'm aware, were the first ones in the state of Maine government to say, we ain't coming back, guys. So I was really proud of that. The reason I made the decision so quickly is I have an aging workforce. I only have about 2 people that are of the younger generation. Well, I'll say really millennials. Everybody else is baby boomers and above. So over half of my staff is ready to retire in the next 24 months. With an aging population, they are more at risk. Many of them care for their elderly parents. And I had a number of staff reach out and just say, we're scared to come back to work. And I wanted to honor those desires and those wishes to stay remote. I have offered each division or team underneath me has 1 day in the office dedicated to them. So we kept a total of 5 or 6 spaces. They can come in and work, they can meet in a safe distance. And then 1 day a month I've dedicated for the team to try to get together. And whether we stand outside and have hot coffee in the middle of January in a blizzard, or whether we, go to the beach and enjoy the view in the summertime, those are critical pieces to building the remote workforce long term.
That's a huge testament to your leadership, Jamie, that you listen to your staff and you're concerned about them, and already having the concern about having to hire droves of staff in the next 24 months, man. Yep. Roz, how about you? I know that you're teleworking, but you've been in the EOC for, gosh, how many days? 156 days, you said?
164, but
who's counting, right?
But I myself am not teleworking because they won't let me. But everybody else in my division, I have my deputy director comes in about 3 days a week, and I have about, out of 60 people, I have about maybe 5 that will just come in once a week to kind of check in kind of thing. I really we would have done this before now. My secretary really wanted to do it, but we got such pushback from a couple of groups. And the one I pulled kicking and screaming was legal.
Yeah.
Because of the document signatures and the reviews and that thing. They love their paper folders. So I see the challenges there are probably universal, where you have a group that just don't want to let go of that tangible thing. And finally, when they were forced into it, they realized it was fine. Everything's fine. We put them in OneDrives. We got them situated in folders that can't be accessed unless you have code. We have all kinds of, they have their little spiel at the bottom. This is confidential product. So the fear, I think, that was inherent just sort of dissipated.
Yeah.
I see us never going back 100%. I'm with Jamie as far as the full workforce, how that will affect me specifically with my division. I still think I'll probably be 70-30 at the end of the day, probably have 70% teleworking and still 30%, depending on the day. Like I may let, some people have asked, I want to come in 1 day a week. Okay. So if I have 6 cubicles, I put people in 4 of the 6 and leave the 2 in the middle open, whatever that looks like. Some people like that interaction. And if it's safe, I want them to be able to have it. So we have the indoor mask policy, not wearing it because I'm by myself, just to be clear, so I don't get in trouble. I'm in a room by myself, but at some point that will be lifted, but people will still have a nice, healthy restraint on how they move forward, because we don't know what length of time we're dealing with, but it's been very successful here.
Yeah. Talk about innovation. I won't put the state on the spot. It's neither one of Roz or Jamie's states, but there was one of our central procurement offices early on in March who reached out to us and said, our staff don't have laptops. Our staff has desktops. We have an overwhelming majority of our staff who don't have home internet access.
Yep.
What do we do? So they pivoted again so quickly, purchased laptops, and they're set up working remotely. It is incredible how quickly, when forced to do it, it can be done. So I'm so impressed. We have a question from Nancy Zilke. What challenges did your organizations have to ensure your employees and other state employees had VPN access and laptop printers that had proper profile security access?
For us, we did not do printers because we are going digital. So we didn't do that, but we did put the outlay for the VPN. We also had to get a couple of, not a couple, maybe more than a couple computers, but that had to do with different types of access they had. But to me, the amount, once we get there and we reduce our footprint, to Jamie's point, there's so many different ways you reduce your footprint. I mean, it's a life balance footprint. It's an eco footprint. I mean, it touches everything.
Yeah.
So I think that's sort of the way we're looking at it.
How about you, Jamie, ensuring your staff and then other state employees the VPN access?
Well, so that is one of our challenges here in the state of Maine, as rural and as big as we are. We're very fortunate that most of our staff work in the capital area, which is Augusta. We do have a couple staff that live 20 to 30 minutes outside the state capital in the middle of the woods on the side of a mountain. And you know, internet access is challenging at best. We have a broadband issue in our state, as many other states are facing. So I think we're down to about 2 staff that they can access, but it's not always consistent internet. So I would say I wouldn't encourage them to sign on to a Zoom presentation like this in their home. They would need to go in the office. And we've made accommodations for staff that if you have challenges, if you don't have internet access, can you borrow it from somebody else? Can you have it installed? Can we help you look at the financial ramifications of that? Can we mitigate some of that? We did not buy printers for folks going home. We're paperless, right? You don't need it. You don't need to sign a contract. Use DocuSign or Adobe Sign. Think about e-signatures. Things are much faster through Microsoft OneDrive and sharing documents in that manner rather than trying to mail a document home. And I guess the one other point that I would make about being remote and making sure that folks have what they need, oftentimes in the state we have quote unquote snow days, right? So if it's snowing too hard, if it's a blizzard or whatever, we can't get there. The state would shut down for a day, allow the transportation crews to clear the roads, and then we'd go in the next day. What I would envision happening in the future, certainly subject to Governor Mills' direction, we may not have snow days anymore. We may say, hey, government's still open on a limited basis. You may still be able to conduct business as needed. One of the huge drawbacks of that is that kids will stay home, schools will be shut down, and they don't have snow days anymore. They have to do work remotely now. Like, that was a staple of my childhood that was just ripped away, and it kind of broke my heart because now I have to work and I have to teach. And so there is a benefit for state government to remain open in those inclement times. You know, Roz, when you can't get there in the middle of a hurricane for 3 or 4 days, there's remote access to keep government open.
Yeah. Dan Wolf from Virginia had mentioned that they've expanded VPN capacity by 700%. So that may be a connection for later on today. Thank you, Dan. Some comments about fears, and I know, Roz, in your kind of opening remarks, you talked about some of your staff being fearful of that teleworking. What have you done, or what's the approach to help your staff get over some of that fear, those who are fearful of teleworking?
Well, the fear, well, actually, I thought when we started, the fear would be on the supervisor side, you know, kind of inherent in, hey, are they going to be able to get everything done? How will I know if they're actually getting everything done? So that's where I thought it would be. But in fact, it was about 50-50. Some of the initial communications we got back were, well, we don't know if we're not going to do this right, if we're going to get in trouble. And it was just really almost out of the box fear. So I think it's because it was so new to them. So we really had to have quite a few discussions. And I had to pull the reins on a couple of supervisors who were over supervising. Like, they were fearful, this particular new supervisor. So I'll give her, you know, she was new. So she, you know how you get a new supervisor, they try really hard, you know, and they want to make sure. And she was overzealous. She was doing Microsoft Teams calls like every hour and a half to check in. And that employee called me at home and said, do we have And I said, no, but I understood it. I understood it at the beginning because they're trying to establish the parameters. and all the way we work. And you know, what's so funny, Jamie brought it up. It doesn't really matter if the work gets done and everybody has a healthy attitude about their work, then do we really care where they do it?
Mm-hmm.
I think they cared. I've got about maybe 6 on the survey we did that really miss the interaction. So those are the ones I'll try to figure out a way to get them in the office 1 day a week when they feel like, when we lift some of this and doing it. But I think that the fear, it surprised me that it was also on the side of the employee, not just the supervisor.
Absolutely. Let's go ahead and switch gears to efficiencies, best practices, takeaways. If the NASCA team could bring up the next poll question. We do have a question about shifts from stakeholders moving away from just-in-time inventory to having reserves. Is that affecting decision-making for you, Roz and Jamie, and budgeting? How is that changing as we get that poll question pulled up?
You want to go first? You want me to go first?
Roz, I think that's all loaded for you.
Yes, we have had to recently enter into 2 leases for warehouses on top of our 250,000 square foot warehouse that we currently had for emergency operations. We now have 2 more, and we're going to look for a third because I'm sitting 130 semis deep right now at a location with water and food. Because not only am I pulling, I have hospital beds that we didn't use, so we're holding those. I've got vents that we didn't use, I'm holding those, masks, gowns, that's in a location. But then I've got all this stuff for the hurricane, you know, because we know it's a coming, you know. So we're having that issue of trying to load up where we can. So we're not doing, on hurricane stuff, we never did just in time. To be fair, we never did. Florida has been hit too many times. So we always have about 80 to 100 trucks from June 1st to November, so that we're just ready, and we usually offload those into our warehouse and then use them as needed. Now we have the MREs, water, plus we have our COVID response, and then we have a warehouse we're trying to mix them together, because in some cases we're going to have COVID stuff going along with food. I mean, we were feeding kids because with school being out, and I'm sure Jamie had this too, you know, 70% of the kids were getting their breakfast and lunches in certain counties that we have. So we had to pivot to that so that we were able to have those kids be fed.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I would just add, I think ours, state of Maine, very similar to what Roz explained, only on a smaller level. We don't, for state government specifically, we don't have a central warehouse, right, for supplies. We did away with a central warehouse several years ago. We stood up a warehouse in 2.5 weeks, and that was from finding a lease to filling it with PPE. So we were at a critical time. And that warehouse supplied all of our Department of Education 278 schools, and we are now distributing the PPE so that schools can reopen. We have got 1 school opening in 2 days. So really just such an important piece. We do have, we work with our MEMA group, Maine Emergency Management Association, and the Center for Disease Control to maintain some level of stockpile in response to blizzards and hurricanes, water, that kind of stuff. With freezing temperatures in the winter, we have to be super careful that our warehouse is up to temperature and that kind of thing. Our agriculture department has a new lease where they've signed to stockpile some food throughout coronavirus. And making sure that in the event we get an ice storm or any other storms over the winter, we will be able to accommodate feeding children and the elderly as needed.
Yeah. So what other practices that you've employed during the pandemic can you see becoming, you know, normal practice moving forward? I don't imagine suspending procurement law will continue, but maybe, you know, these policy updates, implementing these KPIs, what other practices do you think will continue?
I think that the shorter, Jamie's explanation of what they're doing right now, that's not a regular RFP, that's a shorter procurement cycle. I feel like some of that may stick if we're able to utilize the T's and C's and be able to reduce some of the structure there. I know the vendors have been asking for it forever.
Yeah.
To try to make it less punitive in their opinion on them. I have mixed emotions about where that line is, because I still think we have to protect our state's interests. So I do believe that we need to move away from the highly repetitive, structured model to a simplistic look. And if that means doing it like Maine does it and having this almost like a pre-qual, but with the competition factor, and then you got your dollars in there, that may be what it looks like. You know, I think every state in the union right now is looking at different things that we're going to do, because this, if it's not this, we're going to have something else, you know. And if this was our eye-waking moment, then maybe this is where our innovation we've been trying to do for years. Hate to use the A word, but we are trying to look really heavily at Agile in Florida and try to figure out how, I know, Jamie, it's a mess. I'm trying to figure it out too, but how we're able over time, it's not a one-year fix. It's probably going to be a 3 to 5 because you've got statute and rule and everything else. But some of those things can address these very cumbersome processes. So I think if it's taught us anything, it's that we have to be able to be more flexible and quicker.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would just add to that. People want what they want, and they want it now, and they don't want to wait for it. And that's one of the reasons why procurement and the procurement processes have been seen as an impediment for so long, and transaction focused, right? The administrative process, it's taking that connotation of procurement as the gatekeeper to moving to agile in Roz's case, or efficiently, quicker, faster decisions. So I think that's probably the number one takeaway best practice that will come from this, is more innovative, quicker, competitive bidding that's still effective. It still builds confidence in our constituents. But I think the other piece that's so critical to take away and maintain is collaboration and inviting procurement to the conversation. So often we see those conversations happen around us as procurement officers, and then we, you know, maybe we're sent an email, hey, we need to buy such and such, we need a lot of it, can you help? Well, of course we can't help, because we don't know the specifications, we don't know the why behind it. And as part of this pandemic, procurement has been a linchpin in being able to assist administrations and governors with responding to the pandemic. And the sea change for me was having a seat at the table so that I could understand, what is it that the governor needs? What is it that my administration needs, so that I can help coordinate my staff to get it in the fastest, efficient way possible. So I truly hope that collaboration and communication and having procurement as a key linchpin stays as a best practice.
Well, Jamie, that's a perfect segue to our final poll question. I want to talk a little bit about the relationships that we've been building. The last poll question is, has the pandemic increased the frequency of communication between your CPO and the chief administrator or the governor, or that group as a trio? I'm curious about that. My guess would be yes. Relationships, internal, external relationships, have been so critical over the last several months. I know that we entered into some relationships on the NASPO, the association level, with other organizations early on in 2020 with high hopes for collaboration and exciting projects. And, you know, we were so grateful that those relationships were in place when we really needed them. And maybe we didn't get to do the fun, exciting things we wanted to do this year, but they were so critical, 100%, overwhelmingly, yes, increased communication between that group of folks. You know, we've been in contact with National Governors Association, sharing resources. The FBI has reached out to us, talking about risk mitigation factors for avoiding fraudulent actors, as they call them, bad actors, and selling PPE. These relationships that we either created before the pandemic or have created because of necessity of the pandemic have been so critical. So Roz and Jamie, can you talk a little bit about those key partnerships, those key relationships in your states, and what's been most useful for you?
Well, for me, go ahead.
Yeah, so I'll just touch quickly. Frequency and communication are the two words that I took out of that slide, Olivia. Communication is not stopping by somebody's cubicle anymore, going to have a cup of coffee with them, right? How do you communicate now? It's Microsoft Teams, it's email, it's Zoom, it's instant messages, it's phone calls, it's calls through the computer, it's text messages.
At 10 o'clock at night. Yep.
Right. You can't run from communication, so it's inherent that the increase in frequency is going to happen. I would just add to that, the method of communication has changed. Yeah. I get text messages now from my administration throughout the day. It's not, hey, let's shoot Jamie an email and wait an hour for an answer. It's, I want an answer right now. So Roz, please go ahead.
Well, for Florida, I feel very blessed. I have a very good open dialogue with my chief administrator, and I deal with the governor's office all the time. I think it's because of how I was thrown into the EOC in 2016, not my choosing, by the way, but it happened that way, and I'm happy I'm there now because I think we can affect a great change when we work with emergency coordinators for our states. But I do believe that unless the CPO has some sort of great interaction with both of those factions, that you will not have the most efficient outcome. If we are told something after the fact and just make it happen after the decision's been made, then our outcome may not meet the expectations that they were trying to get to at the front end.
Absolutely. So Scott, are there any questions from the attendees that I've missed?
I don't see any additionals, but from the chat, from the banter that's back and forth, I think it's fair to say there's also an interest in terms of how you all and your teams are surviving. So what are you innovating around in terms of both the health, physical and mental health of your teams, but also your physical and mental health?
I think Jamie and I have already addressed this with Olivia this morning. Hers is a martini and mine's a vodka cran pineapple. No, kidding, kind of.
Roz walks like 20 miles a day, so she's putting us all to shame.
I have encouraged my teams to, it's not good enough to just be home, because you can get just as depressed or isolated or whatever those words are at home as you can feel like you get at work. So we try to, I operate through, like Jamie, obviously, we operate through humor. And often we can engage our teams that way. And I would say the mental health was very, I don't know how it was in Maine, but I can tell you week maybe 6 to 16 was really hard, because at that point, nobody saw a light at the end of the tunnel, or if they did, they assumed it was a train. So for us, we were trying to communicate that life-work balance wasn't just about being home. Go outside. You don't have to go around people. We're lucky, you know, we have the beach here. Go to an isolated beach. You don't have to go to a crowded beach. Go play Frisbee with your dog. Do something that affects a change for you mentally. And for me, it's RV camping. I'm leaving at 4 o'clock today, and I won't be back till Sunday, and I'm turning my phones off tomorrow afternoon.
You earned it. But Roz and Jamie, both of you, that's a testament to your leadership, that you have that empathy and that you're looking out for your employees' emotional health, because yeah, things are crazy at work and you're trying to find PPE and you're like, your head's spinning, but also there's a pandemic going on. So being aware of that and being empathetic to your staff, I think, is so key. We have a question from Dustin Lanier. How do you see PPE being contracted for going forward? Is it still phone calls overseas, or will it pivot to more structure at some point?
For us, it's already pivoted. Now, see, you made me do that. I would have done that on my own. It has already gone to a structure internally, domestically. We are not specifically reaching out overseas anymore, and we haven't for some time. Actually, we've been using folks domestically to reach out and do those things for us. Credible sources, we finally whittled down to the group that we feel comfortable with. Yeah. I do feel like, Dustin, that this is going to be something that's ongoing as we still build our domestic supply. I don't think we're anywhere near the diminishing return point there. I think there's other companies that are going to still move to production in different areas that we just haven't heard from yet. I think that's coming. I mean, the LO being an example. Hanes underwear is another great example. If you guys haven't done that in Maine, we've got underwear masks all over the state of Florida. And they're what?
Them tidy whities, Roz.
They are awesome. And if you get a tie-dye kit, you can tie-dye them and wear them. And I mean, you got to use your imagination, right? You don't want to look like everybody else in a mask. So I think that if this has taught us anything other than what we've already talked about, is that we cannot count on everybody else on the planet to fix our problems. So hopefully that continues to grow domestically so that we're able to address this without the issues we had from overseas.
And I would just add to Roz's comments, the state of Maine is looking a little bit more ahead to a broader, deeper emergency contract portfolio, one that not only accounts for a blizzard running through or an ice storm, pandemics, like we're trying to really rack our brain for the worst of the worst. Maybe it's Godzilla, climbing up Mount Katahdin or something. What are the things that are really going to go wrong that we need to account for? Cybersecurity attack, right? We're putting a contract portfolio together to how to deal with cybersecurity. If somebody needs to buy something and I'm working remotely and all of my computers, my 6 cell phones, my iPad goes out and I can't reach anybody, how am I effective? And that's a pretty heavy question to have to answer.
Yeah.
Yes, I agree.
There is a comment from Tony Downing in Utah. CPOs are definitely superheroes this year, and chief administrators need to make sure that they know how much they're appreciated. So thank you, Tony. We'll definitely share that with the rest of our members. It means a lot coming from you. So we have just a few minutes left before we wrap up. Fabulous conversation, fabulous questions. The last question I have for you both, Roz and Jamie, looking forward to 2021. I know as a millennial, I've seen lots of memes talking about how 2020 needs to be over and canceled. It is the worst year ever. We're all looking forward to the future, to a brighter future. Are you optimistic? What are your thoughts looking forward to next year?
I am. I'm optimistic. I think that we have to be optimistic because what is the alternative? Do we just want to fall into the deep abyss? Plus, I think you've seen so much resiliency. I mean, you guys have seen some of this stuff on TV where this guy goes and collects all the stuff to feed all these kids, and you have some great stories out there, and human nature is going to rise up. Now we have the other stories too, but I think that in our positions as CPOs and in your positions as chief administrators, we've got to look up, because we've got to get our teams, all of our teams, whether it's the CPOs and their teams or your larger teams, because if we don't do that, then how can they? So yes, I'm very optimistic.
Thanks, Ross. But you, Jamie?
Yeah, 2021, it's going to be great, right? Chief procurement officers need to work very closely with our chief administrators to battle the budget constraints that now many of us will be facing across the nation. And I go back to my earlier comment, it's up to us to write the story of the new normal. So 2021 will be what we make of it. I think, for me personally, I'm so excited for 2021 to use up all the one-ply toilet paper that's in my house.
That's not
and when it's gone, I'm going to do the happy toilet paper dance.
Are there any final questions for Jamie or Roz here today before we wrap up? Scott, did I miss anything?
So I want to pick up on Jamie's point about, predicting what's coming next. And I think cyber is a great example of the nature of the pandemic has a very similar nature to what a cyber attack would look like if it were successful. But in that realm, obviously we went from a passion for just-in-time and inventory management. What are your stakeholders saying about reserves? Roz, you talked about the trailers that were packed full of equipment, but on a longer term basis, do you see the philosophy about procurement shifting in the future as a result of this event?
Yes, I think that once we're through this piece of uncertainty and how we're looking at it right now, yes, I do believe that we'll be closer again to just in time. We're not going to have these warehouses full. I do believe we'll always have a little bit of reserve because we don't want to have to do this again, but not to the levels we're doing it right now. And the cyber piece is huge. Jamie, man, it's huge down here too. We just stood up a new technology agency again. Well, it's actually a division within our agency, and one of their main goals is cybersecurity. And I'm concerned about that because it's already hit several cities in the state of Florida.
And Scott, I think for us, our goal is to build the trust and the vendor relationship so that we don't have to maintain massive quantities of piles of PPE. We can rely on our vendors and the solid contracts that we've put in place so that they can assist us in responding. I don't expect that to change in the future. I don't think we'll have massive warehouses full of anything. I think it'll be more just in time.
Well, Well, I want to thank Jamie and Ross for stepping away from the craziness that's going on in both of your states for being here today. And thank you to Tani and the NASCA team for having us. We're happy to engage with anyone offline for additional questions, happy to share our contact information, but wish everyone well and hope that your families and your teams remain healthy. Look forward to seeing you all in person hopefully soon.